Hey friends, before we dive into this story, please hit subscribe. It helps these stories reach more people and keeps the channel alive. The streets of Bruges glimmered under winter rain, cobblestones reflecting the pale orange of street lamps like liquid fire. I was sitting at our small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, staring at my phone. Her message had arrived at 1:17 a.m. Relax, I was only an hour late. Elena, my wife, my partner of 12 years, my anchor, an hour late. She didn't know I had waited alone at the opera, the curtain rising and falling, listening to the orchestra swell while my chest constricted with something I couldn't name. Hurt, disbelief, rage. She didn't know that I had counted every minute, memorized the way the chandeliers threw light across the gilded hall, or imagined every possible excuse she might have concocted. I didn't reply. I hadn't replied to her for days, not since I realized I wasn't just waiting for her. I was waiting for the person I thought she was. That belief that love could be unshakable, that promises mattered, had been slowly stripped away by years of subtle betrayals. Meetings she forgot to mention, late-night calls that ended abruptly, trips that didn't appear on the shared calendar. I remember our first year in Bruges. It was spring, and the canals were framed with cherry blossoms. She laughed as I slipped on the wet stones, and we shared waffles by the markt. I thought that laughter anchored her to me, but laughter is fleeting, and people can drift even in the smallest cities. After her text, I walked the empty streets for hours. Winter wind sliced through my coat. Shop windows were dark, cafes closed. Only the water moved, carrying the reflection of lights like broken glass. I thought about the last 12 years, the love, the fights, the quiet nights when our breaths synchronized in the dark. And I realized that love had become a ledger. Each omission, each slight, each untruth accounted for. And in that ledger, her hour's absence was just the final entry. I started to think of my father. He had been a man of integrity, a dock worker in Antwerp, who died believing that honesty was a burden, not a virtue. My mother had told me he had been fired once for pointing out safety violations. No one listened, and he left the docks a broken man. I had inherited his sense of justice, sharpened by his disappointment. Elena's absence wasn't just a lapse of manners. It was a pattern, a disregard that mirrored every time my father's warnings were ignored. And now, I realized, I had to act, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with finality. I began quietly observing her, the late meetings, the familiar coffee shop she visited after work, the messages she sent to people I didn't know. I noted everything, not for revenge yet, but for understanding. I needed clarity. It came one Thursday evening. She returned home, cheeks flushed from a run in the cold air, her eyes bright with some triumph I didn't share. I watched her unpack her bag, noting the subtle scent of another perfume, one I had never bought, never touched. My silence was deliberate. I let her think she had the power to provoke me. The next morning, I left for the city archives. I began tracing her business interactions, invoices, and emails. I didn't need to hack. I had worked in compliance before. A careful hand, a patient mind, and the public record was a treasure trove. I uncovered a series of small misappropriations at her consulting firm, funds diverted to entities abroad, invoices inflated and approved without review. Nothing overtly criminal, but enough to reveal carelessness, and enough to expose a network of deceit that extended further than just the company. I didn't go to the authorities immediately. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I built a record, a silent chronicle, matching times and dates, locations and excuses. By the time she noticed my distance, it was too late. She tried to bridge the silence with calls, texts, even flowers left on the table. I never replied. She started to panic. The small, seemingly inconsequential lies, the extra hour at the opera, the unlogged client dinner, the sudden conference trip, were no longer trivial. They were keys in a door I had quietly unlocked. By late January, I had prepared a dossier for her board of directors, a concise, irrefutable set of evidence linking her personal negligence to corporate mismanagement, risking reputational harm and potential financial penalties. I scheduled an anonymous submission to both internal auditors and external regulators. The morning after the submission, she awoke to emails, phone calls, and messages from legal counsel. Panic replaced triumph. She called me frantically, tears in her voice. "Why?" she demanded. I let the line ring. She came to the apartment hours later, hoping to confront me, to apologize, to persuade. I didn't open the door. She knocked until her knuckles bled against the wood. Finally, she texted, "Please." I didn't realize. I was careless. I love you. I didn't reply. I never did. Weeks passed. The board issued a formal reprimand. Regulators launched an investigation. Her reputation, once built on competence and charm, eroded under the weight of oversight and scrutiny. Colleagues whispered in the hallways. Clients hesitated. She had always assumed that proximity to power, the family name, our shared social circle, would protect her. But power is fragile when truth is relentless. I moved out a month later. I rented a small apartment near the canal, watching the swans glide across the water as the city awoke. The winter melted slowly, and the early sunlight reflected off the brick buildings like honesty spilling across stone. I was alone, but not lonely. Silence had become a shield, a statement, a boundary no one could cross. Sophia, my ex-wife, the woman who had once been my anchor, appeared in local news occasionally, her career teetering, her efforts to stabilize the firm struggling. Friends asked if I regretted it. I said nothing. I understood something that she never could. Accountability is a language that doesn't require explanation. Silence can speak louder than confession. By spring, the snow had melted completely from the cobblestones, revealing the scars beneath, just as my patience had revealed hers. I walked along the canals one morning, wind in my hair, the scent of fresh bread and coffee in the air. I thought of my father again, and for the first time, I felt something settle in my chest, a measure of closure, a weight lifted not by confrontation, but by deliberate, silent action. Sometimes in the evenings, I pass the opera house. Lights gleam in the windows. I remember her laughter, her perfume, the hour she was late, and I smile quietly, knowing that in my silence, I had ended everything, not with anger, not with shouting, but with the unwavering force of truth and patience. Life in Bruges continued around me, indifferent and persistent. The city, like time, doesn't wait. But I had finally waited long enough to reclaim what mattered: my dignity, my conscience, and the calm certainty that some silences are louder than any words.